Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar about the TN visa. My name is Dustin Saldarriaga, and I am a senior associate with Scott Legal PC. As I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the TN visa, which is one of the most common visas that our firm helps our clients with. And specifically, we'll talk about the TN visa's requirements, as well as a very common question that comes up from employers, which is whether the TN visa requires sponsorship by the employer. A few things before we get started. Some of you may know that our founder, Ian Scott, was previously on a TN visa and actually founded the firm on an E2 visa. And his experience navigating the process really does inform the way that we work with our clients and have a very client-centered approach to everything that we do. Our firm is a full-service immigration firm, so though we do focus on business immigration, we also handle family immigration, humanitarian immigration, and everything in between. So if you do have any questions about anything involving U.S. immigration, don't hesitate to reach out to us. This webinar is part of a series. We try to do at least 2 webinars a month, and oftentimes many more than that. So after this presentation, we will be sending you an email with a link where you can sign up for those future webinars. We do hope to see you on those future webinars. That email will also have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that you see on your screen, as well as a comprehensive TN visa guide, and a link where you can visit our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel, we post short videos as well as full-length webinars, including this one, to our YouTube channel. So it really is a great resource that we hope you'll check out and find helpful. As I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded. If you have a question, feel free to send it in through either the Q&A function on Zoom or the chat function. I'll be actively monitoring those questions, and I'll either share them or answer them when they come up or save them for the end. But either way, we do plan to get through all of the questions by the end of the presentation. So we are very fortunate today to have my colleague Michaela Vrazdova here to speak with us. Michaela has extensive experience preparing TN visas. So without further ado, I will go ahead and pass it off to Michaela.
Thank you so much, Dustin, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, so let's dive in and let's go over the TN visa requirements. So to qualify for a TN visa, the first requirement is that you are a national or a citizen of either Canada or Mexico. And what this means is that you have to have a passport of either Canada or Mexico, and it doesn't matter, like which country you were born in. So like, let's say you were born in, China, India, like Italy, like anywhere else, but you later acquired either Canadian or Mexican citizenship, you could still qualify for a TN visa using either Canadian or Mexican passport. The second requirement is that the profession you want to come to the US to perform must appear on the list of professions provided in the TN regulations. So the TN regulations provide a very kind of specific list, they list all the qualifying professions, and they also list the minimum education requirements or credentials you have to have to qualify under the specific profession. So some professions require a degree. So for example, a bachelor degree. Other professions allow qualification based on some sort of diploma or a certificate and work experience. And there are also some professions that allow you to qualify only based on your work experience, but that's not most of them. Like some professions, that are listed in the TN regulations are, for example, an accountant, architect, engineer, economist, lawyer, dentist, psychologist. But again, these are just some examples, and the TN regulations have like a specific list of professions. You could qualify under and then apply for a TN visa. So then the next requirement is that you must have the required qualifications to practice the profession. So as I mentioned, again, the TN regulations kind of list all the, all the kind of permitted either education or qualifications that are permitted under specific category. So like, for example, if you want to apply under the architect category, you would look at the regulations, and then, you would see that category, to qualify under that category, you either have to have a bachelor's degree, like in architecture, or a licenciatura degree, or a state or provisional license to kind of, be able to practice in that profession. And the qualifications will be kind of different for, like each of the professions. So you would just always want to, check, like what is your education, what is the category you could qualify under, and then check the qualifications and make sure that you have the required qualifications to, to practice that profession in the US. The next requirement is that you must have a pre-arranged job offer in the US. So this means basically that, the TN visa, to qualify for the TN visa, you already have to have a job offer from a US company. So the TN visa doesn't allow you to come to the US and do interviews for the TN visa. You already have to have a job offer, and then you would have to present that job offer letter at your TN visa interview. And the job offer letter has to have some specific, some specific things in it, and we'll go over that in more detail later in the presentation. And then the final requirement is that, in the job, you must be employed to engage in professional activities that are consistent with the listed professions. So what this means is basically that there has to be some sort of alignment between your education, your degree, then the job you are coming to the US to perform, and then the job duties you are coming to perform. So now let's discuss, as Dustin mentioned, one of the common questions we get from our clients or kind of potential clients is, does the company in the US, do they have to sponsor me? Or what does the US company have to do, throughout the TN process? So the TN visa doesn't require sponsorship as there is required for example H-1B or L-1 visa. So for example, if if an employer is sponsoring you for an H-1B visa, they have to file a labor condition application. They have to pay you a very specific wage that is determined by the regulations. You only can work at a specific location. Every time you would work in a different location, or your salary would change, or your job duties would change, all of that would have to be kind of reported to the government. Potential amendments would have to be filed. So I would say the H-1B and L-1 visas are very kind of highly regulated visa categories. And those require that the company kind of sponsors you, files petitions with the Department of Labor, USCIS. For the TN visa, the company, they still have to write you a job offer letter. They have to, sign the job offer letter. And you have to bring that letter to your interview. But that's basically, all they have to do. They don't have to file anything with the Department of Labor, unless you are doing a change of status or extension of status with USCIS. Nothing has to be filed with USCIS. So the TN visa process is just kind of for the employers is much more kind of easier and more straightforward than if they were sponsoring you, for example, for an H-1B visa. So now let's discuss how can you apply for the TN visa. So Canadians have one big advantage, and that is that they can apply for a TN visa at the border, and they can basically apply at any port of entry. And the advantage of this is that, you know, the process is usually very fast. They just show up at the border, you know, bring all the supporting documents, and then the CBP officer makes a decision, you know, on the application, you know, like right there. Also, another you know, advantage of this process is that the Canadians only have to pay $50 for, you know, kind of like the TN visa, this process. If they want a paper I-94, they have to pay additional $6, but you know, the fees are kind of like really not that high. Mexican nationals cannot apply just at the border. They have to go and apply at a consulate. So how this works is that, you know, they would have to submit a DS-160 form, pay a TN visa fee, and then schedule a TN visa interview appointment, and then bring all the supporting documents to the appointment. You know, I would say like it usually takes you know, like a couple weeks, or, you know, in some cases like a couple months to get a TN visa interview appointment. So you know, they usually have to kind of like wait much longer, you know, like than Canadians who can just show up at the border. But you know, the backlogs, you know, like during COVID, you know, like the backlogs were really bad. Like they had to wait like a really long time. Like now it did improve, but they still have to kind of like go through the process and apply at a consulate. Another option for both, you know, the Canadians and Mexican nationals would be to apply either for a change of status or extension of status through USCIS. In our experience, you know, like this process is not that common for a couple of reasons. So the first one is that applying through USCIS is going to cost, you know, either the employer or the employee much more money. So the filing fee for the TN application with the USCIS is $460. Another reason is that it's going to take several months to get a decision on the TN. You know, like usually when the applicant gets a job offer, the company wants the employee to start as soon as possible. And, you know, the standard processing times are, I would say, around like 6 months, or, you know, like even longer. There is a possibility to pay for premium processing, but that's going to cost $2,500. So that's kind of like another fee that would have to be paid. Another kind of like reason is, or another thing to consider is that like which category will you be applying under. So some categories, you know, USCIS is scrutinizing them kind of like much more than the CBP officers or even consulates. So if you are applying, you know, for example, as a management consultant or economist, it just may be better to apply either at the border or at a consulate. So, you know, that's why, like, for all these reasons, like USCIS filings are not that common, and in some cases not recommended. In some cases, you know, like when someone doesn't want to leave the US, or like let's say that a Mexican national try to schedule an interview at a consulate, and an interview is not available for the next, like, I don't know, 6 months. You know, in that case, if the premium processing fee is paid, you know, like USCIS will make a decision in 15 days. So, you know, it just may be faster to do the filing through USCIS. You know, so in some cases it may be feasible. It will just depend on, you know, each particular case, like what is, you know, like what may be best for both the employer and the employee. Okay, so now let's discuss some differences for, you know, like Canadian and Mexican nationals. So, you know, the differences, you know, the requirements are really the same for both the Canadian and Mexican nationals. The differences are mostly, as we already went over, in kind of like the application process and how can you apply for the TN visa. So as I mentioned, Canadian nationals can apply for the TN visa at a port of entry. So, you can apply really at any port of entry. If you are applying for the TN visa for the first time, CBP recommends that you apply at one of the kind of like entries they list on their website. Then for Canadian nationals, the TN, if it's approved, it will be generally issued you will get an I-94 for 3 years, and then after that period, you would have to renew it. 3 years is kind of the maximum period of time. Like if the job offer letter or the employment letter kind of specify that they only, like the company only needs you in the US for kind of shorter period of time, like 6 months or 1 year, then the I-94 could be limited, like only up to that period. But generally, like you can, or the employer can ask that you are kind of admitted on the TN status for up to 3 years. If you are Canadian and your spouse is Canadian, then the spouse can apply also at the border. If the spouse is not Canadian, then the spouse will have to go to a consulate and get a TD visa in the passport. So now the process for Mexican nationals, as we mentioned, is the Mexican nationals will have to go to a consulate, and they will have to apply for a TN visa at a consulate. The TN visa for Mexican nationals can either be issued for 1 year, or there was kind of like a recent change that now it can be issued for up to 4 years if you pay an additional fee. There was kind of like one recent great news for Mexican nationals is that, the TN visa can now be issued for up to 4 years. And for Mexican nationals, in some cases, if you are renewing the TN visa, the renewals can be done through mail. But this is going to be kind of specific for every consulate, and you would need to kind of double check, like if the consulate where you will be renewing the visa allows for renewal through mail, or if you will have to attend the interview. And I also want to kind of like quickly go over, like what documents you should bring to the interview. And this is really going to be the same for both Canadian and Mexican nationals. So, you should bring your passport that shows your nationality and that you qualify to apply for a TN visa. Then you will have to bring a letter from the US company that describes, like which TN category you are applying under, describes your job duties, what you'll be doing in the US, how long will you be staying in the US, how long you will be employed in this capacity. It should also describe what the US company does. It should kind of specify whether your job will be full-time or part-time. Either is fine. It should just specify, like how many hours per week you'll be working. And it should also discuss your educational qualifications and kind of like or credentials and how you qualify under that specific TN category. And the job offer letter has to be signed by the US company. The signature has to be the original signature. This is very important because the CBP and the consulates, like they unfortunately don't accept photocopied signature. They want to see, the originally signed job offer letter. So, the US companies, the person who is signing the letter, they will have to mail you the original. And it also has to have the job offer letter also has to have the company's letterhead. And CBP especially is very kind of specific, like what they want to see on the letterhead. So it should be, it should have the company's name, address, and phone number on it. One other thing is, the company letter should have the company's website on it, because sometimes the CBP officers, like when they are reviewing the documents and just, the application, they want to make sure that, the company exists. It's a bona fide job offer. So sometimes what they do is they check the company's website. And sometimes what they also do is they call the phone number that is on the job offer letter. So whoever is signing the TN letter, they should leave their phone number there, and you should inform that person, either from an HR or whoever is signing the letter, that you should let them know when is your interview, like the day and time, so they are kind of like available on phone, just in case the CBP calls them. If they do call them, they usually just kind of like ask to verify the information in the letter, like did you offer job to this person, like what will be their job duties, what will be the salary, and just kind of like basic questions like that. Another thing you will have to bring are your educational degree, the diploma, and then transcripts. You should bring the originals because they like to see the originals. And then, like if you have any, like licenses, or if you're qualifying based on your work experience, then, like you should bring either the relevant license or kind of like the work experience letters from your previous employers. And again, it would be good to have the originals with you. Perfect. So now I will turn it to Dustin.
Great, thank you, Michaela. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about two particularly challenging TN categories. The first is the category of management consultant. And part of the reason why this category is so challenging is because it's one of the very few professional categories that you can qualify for based on experience alone. So if you look at the TN regulations, you'll see that for most professional categories, you need either a degree or you need some kind of a professional license. But for management consultants, you can qualify with a degree or 5 years of experience as a management consultant, or 5 years of experience in a field of specialty that's related to the consulting agreement. So because this is one of the few categories where you can qualify based on experience alone, officers oftentimes think of this category as a catch-all, where there are many people who are applying under this category who aren't necessarily a good fit for the management consulting category, but because they don't meet the qualifications for any other category, they fall into the management consulting category. As a result, government officials heavily scrutinize TN applications for management consultants. So there are a few things to keep in mind if you are trying to come to the US in the management consulting category. And I will say, even though this category is heavily scrutinized, it is frequently approved. And our office has had a number of approvals in this category. There are just a few things to keep in mind if you are planning to apply in this category. And this is also a category where it does typically benefit the applicant to work with an attorney to help guide them through the process. So a few things to keep in mind. The first is that the management consultant category is meant for people who are coming to the US to work in a supernumerary role. And what that means is that when you hire a management consultant, you're not typically hiring someone to work permanently for you as a management consultant. Usually a management consultant will come in, will advise you on a specific challenge that your company is facing. They'll speak with leadership at the company. Company leadership will adopt those recommendations, and then the management consultant's role is finished. So if someone is applying to come into the US as a management consultant on a TN visa, and they are not coming in to work for a management consulting firm, then they need to be coming in one of these what's called supernumerary roles, which is a non-permanent role. Let's take a quick step back, because when we're talking about the risk of this category, there really is a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, which is least risky for TN management consultants, it's those people who are working for a management consulting firm and are looking to come to the US to work for a management consulting firm in the US. So to take an example, if a national of Canada is working for McKinsey in Toronto, and they are trying to get a TN visa to work for Boston Consulting Group in New York City, That is a fairly straightforward management consultant application, and it's probably not going to face, additional scrutiny. And the reason is they're coming to the U.S. to work for a management consulting firm. Where this category gets especially risky, though, is when the person is coming to the US to work for a company that is not a management consulting firm. So, to take an example, let's say there's a US company that makes and sells solar panels. And a national of Canada is an expert on designing and selling solar panels. And they are looking to come to the US to work for this solar panel company to really help that company figure out how to improve its processes for manufacturing solar panels and then marketing those solar panels. That would be a risky TN application. Again, because the company in the US is a solar panel company, they're not a management consulting company. So the person is coming to the US to advise them on a specific challenge they're facing, whether that's producing the panels or selling them. To really make that application as strong as possible, the application, again, needs to show that this person's coming to the US to address a finite challenge and that they're coming to the US only for that challenge, not to fill a permanent role at the US company. Other ways to strengthen the application are to have a consulting agreement that really clearly defines what the challenge is that the person will be addressing, how long that's going to take them to address that challenge, how they're going to be compensated. Usually, a salary indicates a more permanent role. So if the agreement can talk about how they'll be paid based on performance or perhaps paid hourly, paid as, for example, a contractor rather than as an employee, if that's aligned with the employment arrangement or the engagement, the work engagement, then those are things that can strengthen these kinds of applications. But again, they do tend to be particularly risky. And again, the Michaela talked about how the TN visa can be issued for a period of up to 3 years for Canadian nationals, 4 years for nationals of Mexico. For the management consulting category, you really want to question whether you need that full period, because if you're going for a 4-year management consultant visa or a 3-year, you might get questions about whether your role really is temporary to address a specific challenge or not. The economist category is the second of the two challenging categories that we'll talk about today. And the reason that the economist category is particularly challenging is completely different from the management consulting category. The government specifically put out a policy in 2017 that narrowed essentially the work that someone can come into the US to do on a TN economist visa. And specifically, what the government said is that those coming into the US on a TN visa to work as economists should not be coming in to work as financial analysts or market research analysts. So what does that mean? Well, if we go to the Occupational Outlook Handbook, and you can Google that, OOH, economist, and then click the tab at the top of the screen that talks about what they do, you'll see some job duties, and those are job duties that economists are supposed to do. They're supposed to engage in using microeconomics, macroeconomics. They should study the impact of supply and demand on firms or the company that they'll be serving, or the impact on broader sectors of the economy. They can provide economic analysis. These are things that economists are supposed to do and that are good for someone to do if they're coming in as a TN economist. In contrast, financial analysts and market research analysts have additional job duties that are not allowed on a TN visa if they are primarily what the person will be doing. If these are minority tasks, they're taking 10% of the applicant's time, that might be permissible. But if someone's coming into work as a financial analyst or a market research analyst, primarily that's a problem. So what do they do? Financial analysts primarily conduct analyses of information affecting investment programs, and their job is really to figure out how to increase or generate profits from committing money. So investing money and generating profits. That's really what a financial analyst is doing. A market research analyst is using data to help a company market its products and services. So if the job is less what an economist does as defined in the Occupational Outlook Handbook and is more what the Occupational Outlook Handbook defines as a financial analyst or a market research analyst is doing, though that is going to create problems when you're applying for the TN economist category. Now, unfortunately, there really isn't a good option to get a TN visa for someone who works as a financial analyst or a market research analyst. If the job duties are primarily focused on marketing, for example, you're going to have a hard time getting a TN visa. So the recommendation would be to consider other options. An H-1B visa could be a good option. An L-1 may be a good option, potentially an O-1 visa. We have information on all of these options on our blog as well as our YouTube channel. Within the realm of the TN, the management consultant would be likely one of the few categories that you might be able to make the argument for. For example, if someone's coming to the US to advise a US company on how to market its products or services, there is an argument that they could come in as a management consultant. And again, narrowly define that challenge that they're coming to the US to address. Have that consultant agreement, make it a finite period of time, really show that they're not coming in to work as a marketer for the company permanently or long term, but they really are coming in to work as more of a consultant, but to address the marketing issue. So Michaela gave us some great information on the TN application process. So I'll just quickly kind of touch on again a few of the points that she raised. Canadians do have the excellent option of applying at a port of entry. So US Customs and Border Protection, CBP, has authority to adjudicate TN visa applications only for nationals of Canada. So if you have a Canadian passport, you're in luck. If you do not, then unfortunately CBP does not have authority to adjudicate your application, and you would have to apply at a consulate. And that's the case for either nationals of Mexico who are applying for a TN visa, or dependents, even spouses and children of nationals of Canada. If they don't have a Canadian passport, they would have to apply at a consulate. So let's talk about Canadians real quick. Michaela covered the application materials. They would arrive at the port of entry, whether that is an airport or a land crossing, provide the job offer letter, as Michaela said, original signature on company letterhead, with supporting documentation showing their proof of citizenship, showing that they're qualified for the role, as well as their educational and professional qualifications, depending on which they're applying under. Now, some ports of entry, you know, if you're Canadian, you have a lot of options. You can use airports, you can use land crossings, you can use the consulate if you want to. Some ports of entry are optimized for faster TN processing. So one of the services we provide is to work with our clients to figure out strategically where the best place to apply is. If you're a first-time applicant, the website for CBP does have certain ports that are recommended for first-time applicants. Also, you can always call ahead, and that is recommended. Especially since COVID, ports of entry may have differing hours. They might have certain procedures in place. So just call ahead to get a sense of any unique requirements that you need to follow. Nationals of Mexico, again, must apply at a US consulate. They would do so by filing a DS-160 form online. They would pay the application fee, schedule their biometrics and their appointment, their interview. Then they would come into the consulate for their interview with the same application materials that a national of Canada would at the port of entry, have their interview, and at the end of it, they would actually get a visa in their passport. Both nationals of Mexico and Canada, as Michaela said, can apply from within the United States. If they're physically inside the US, they can apply through US Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. They would do that through the employer filing a form I-129 with USCIS. And that application would include all of the supporting documents that that we've talked about before: the employer letter, proof that they qualify based on the education or their experience. With USCIS, you do not need to send in original documents, so you would send in copies. For both the consulate and the port of entry, you do need original documents. They tend to see a lot of fraud, so you really do want to have original signatures, original diploma, original transcript, or certified transcript. So it's worth the time to get those documents rather than showing up at the port of entry and getting a denial just because you don't have an original document. And speaking of which, some common tips and pitfalls when applying for the TN visa. As I mentioned, it never hurts to call ahead. If you have a sense of when you'll be arriving, just give the port of entry a call. You can find phone numbers on the US CBP website. Ask them, let them know when you plan to arrive, and if those hours they will be open to adjudicate TN visa applications. If there's a specific entrance you need to use, if there's anything else you need to know about the process, or if you just show up with your application materials. Your employer, the person at the prospective employer who signed the employer letter, should be available when you are either at the consulate or approaching the port of entry. So give your employer a heads up that you plan to be at the port of entry tomorrow between 2 and 5 o'clock, if they could just be by their phone or have their cell phone on them. Reason being, sometimes officers will call the person who signed the letter just to make sure that the job offer is bona fide, it's legitimate. So it's better for them to be available for that. Similarly, if there is a website listed for the company, make sure the website's live. Sometimes for smaller companies, the website is sometimes down, and that can look very bad if the officer visits the URL and it's not live. So just check the company website beforehand. If it's not live, talk to your employer about making sure it's live before you go apply for the visa. As I mentioned, bring your diploma, official transcripts, and original signed versions of the employer letter if possible. Just assume that the port of entry wants original signatures and original documents. Of course, if you're not applying based on your educational qualifications, for example, if you're applying based on your experience, you wouldn't need to bring your diploma necessarily or your transcripts, but you would want to bring letters from past employers that have original signatures on them. And again, how you qualify is stated in the regulations. So you would look at your profession, you would see how you qualify, whether based on education or experience, and you would bring those documents to show that you qualify. The final point you see on your screen is that the TN visa is a non-immigrant visa. That means that it is not a green card. It is not intended to allow you to stay in the US indefinitely. So you do need to show that you have ties to you need to be ready to show that you have ties to your home country, and that you do not intend to pursue a green card when you're inside the US on a TN visa. Now, this usually does not come up unless you have renewed your TN visa a number of times. If this is the first or second TN visa, usually you're not going to get many questions about your intention to return home at the end of it. But it's always good to come prepared to show that you do have ties to a home country outside the US. And the last note I'll make on that is you can renew a TN visa indefinitely. If you remain qualified, you can continue to extend it, you can continue to renew it. The one exception is the management consultant. You do want to be careful about renewing that for a long time because it is supposed to be finite if you're not working for a management consulting firm. But otherwise, there's not a limit on the number of times that you can renew a TN visa. And also, just to quickly touch on dependents, dependent spouses and dependent children can get a TD visa or TD status, and they can study in the US. Unfortunately, they do not get work authorization, but they can be in the US and study. So with that, we will go ahead and move on to questions. We actually have not received any questions, so I think we covered everything. So with that, I will go ahead and thank Michaela for sharing your expertise, and we do hope to see you all on future webinars. Please do keep an eye out for the email we'll send after this. Visit our YouTube channel, set up a consultation if we can be helpful at all. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dustin. Thank you. Bye.